Hello and welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast for January 30th, 2024. My name is Tom Luongo, and we have a lot to talk about. This is two in a row. I just did one with Larry Johnson yesterday, so this is kind of cool. I don't know. Maybe I'm just actually becoming popular and people are actually getting back to me, or maybe it's just simply the fact that I actually asked some people to be on the podcast and decided to do a couple. So with that said, I have the great pleasure of having with me today someone who's I've been on his show a couple times, the Pete Quinones show. So Pete's with me today because I couldn't think of anybody better as we head into the political silly season of U.S. electoral politics, presidential electoral politics, to talk about how the libertarian as a political movement are pretty much done. And I don't know if that's actually that's my thesis at this point, but I'm going to throw it up to Pete in just a minute to figure out what's going on, because to me it looks for years I've always said, look, there's the world I want and there's the world I've got, and analyzing the world I want is useless, and all we can really do is analyze the world we've got, and from a particular perspective, libertarian thought is a very useful filter, but in this day and age we have much bigger problems than people worrying about, who's going to build the roads. So, Pete, how are you? How you been?
I'm doing good, man. What are you doing having somebody who has pictures of fascists on the wall of his office on your show?
I can't quite see those pictures in the background. Is that like Friedrich Hayek, or is that or Ayn Rand? I can't quite tell anymore because the libertarians have so thoroughly lost the plot. Both of them are now fascists.
Actually, that's a platoon of the Falange from the Spanish Civil War. They were part of the fascists fighting for Franco.
Oh, okay, so they were actual fascists.
Yeah, they were actual fascists. Yeah,
so maybe this is actually the right person to talk to about how the libertarians have lost the plot if you've got fascists in the background. So the last time Pete and I talked, to be honest with you, was the last time I was on a show was about 6 months ago, I think. Yep. And I was complaining, and I was on the show complaining a little bit about the inability of well-intentioned libertarian commentators and researchers to understand the big picture of what it is that they're putting out there. That it's one thing to draw connections and do all that work, but it's another thing to not do the synthetic work, is what it means, and then make the leap, as to how it plays out strategically. Because as far as I'm concerned, I'm all about the strategy while we illuminate the tactics, because of the people that we're dealing with now. But at the same time, am I a post-libertarian in thought? No. Am I a post-libertarian in political action? Absolutely. So I don't know. I just wanted to throw this out to you today, that this idea that, from where I sit, it's pretty obvious that libertarianism as a political movement is a spent process. And I'm just feeling this more and more and more. And it's sad because they have a lot to offer, but they refuse to do so.
Well, I mean, you have to ask the question, was it ever useful at all? I mean, I will immediately point to Ron Paul 2007, because that's where, because of him and seeing him in the debates on the stage, I started to understand politics more fully. I started to take it more seriously. I didn't start to really understand politics fully until I read all the libertarian stuff, and then read outside of libertarianism and started reading political theory outside of libertarianism. And then I was like, oh, okay. So there's how you want it to work, and there's how it really works. Right. And once you realize, oh, this is how I want it to work, but it's not going to work like I want it to work. So what do we do? Once I realized that, then I realized that basically libertarianism, other than at the most local, won't work. And it just doesn't make any sense. Even the messaging. I mean, you had no greater messenger for libertarianism than Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. And he brought a lot of people to him, brought me along the way, started me down the path. And then you not only had, people don't remember this about Ron Paul. Ron Paul did not only bring in right wingers. like right-leaning college kids. He had left-leaning college kids screaming in the Fed. He had, I mean, it was a truly a movement.
Hmm.
Now, movements and revolutions change the world, change society, change culture, change things, change government. It didn't. The world just, I mean, it changed me personally. It changed a whole lot of other people personally. It inspired, like Young Americans for Liberty, which turned out to be co-opted by neocons,
Hmm.
because that's the way things are. If you're not explicitly right wing, you always get stolen by the left. The left always comes in and takes over, unless you're I mean, what are right wing organizations you can think of that haven't been co opted by the left? Chronicles Magazine.
Right.
It's like that. That's like it, really.
Right.
Um, so you look at what happened, what Ron putting the message out there, and the message was rejected. And the world just kept going. You realize that politics, it doesn't matter how great the message is and how great the messenger is. There's a train on the tracks and it's moving. Or as Curtis Yarvin says, Leviathan swims slowly, but he always swims left. So you see that, and you're like, okay, so what can I do? And I think the most libertarian thing I tell people now, people who are still say the most libertarian thing you can do is move out of the cities, buy some land. If you don't want to have goats and chickens and cows, surround yourself with people who have them, and be friends with them, and barter if you can, and whatever. If you're friendly enough, you don't have to barter anymore. Now you're just friends, your family. And take care of yourself. Make yourself bulletproof. Pay
Hmm.
off all your debt. Yeah, own everything. Don't have car payments, stupid things like that. At this point, homeschool your kids. But I would also say be be active politically locally if you're in an area that has where the schools have been taken over by woke, because even though you might be homeschooling your kids, 95 to 98% aren't. And your kids are growing up to be these nice kids who probably don't want power and think that power is immoral and everything. Well, those 95 to 98%, they're not being taught that. They're being taught that, you made a joke, you made a joke that sounded racist once. Well, you need to be canceled. Your banking needs to be taken away. Get involved in your if while you're homeschooling your kids, get involved in the local school, get elected to the local school board, change things, get all that crap thrown out of there. Bulletproof yourself locally.
Hmm.
That's all we can do right now until we see what's going to happen with this national leviathan. That I mean, it's a hydra at this point. How would you take down the government? How would you take down the national government? And I'm not Fed posting. I don't like violence, and I don't think revolution is preferable, especially when you have a hydra. I mean, where would you start?
Right.
It's just going to keep going.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's, to me, libertarianism right now is doing everything to take care of you and your family. And if you can do some get activated politically locally, and do everything you can to fight off this encroaching madness.
So and you bring up a ton of really good points, and the one of the things that I want to point out here is that this is practical politics, and we talked about the same thing on the show, and I talk about it all the time. That people ask me, "So what do we do?" Well, you strengthen your local community. Still use cash. Get to know your local hay guy and your local feed guy, and have a friend who if you don't like to hunt or you don't have the time to hunt, get somebody else to hunt your land for you. Share the meat, do the thing. I mean, I have all the you live back a private road. Well, I got news for you. You're gonna show the neighborhood how to maintain the roads without the government. I live back a private road, and I've been showing my neighborhood exactly how to do that for years. I spent a lot of money on this, and I bring these things up and that's the important thing. So Pete, you and I agree about this completely. Where I'm going to take some umbrage is it's still a viable filter through which to analyze and critique the world and to then predict what's going to happen next. See, the thing that what I found really funny is I knew that the Ron Paul,
Politically, economically, or culturally?
all three.
You think that libertarianism has a culture?
I think there's an ethos. Okay.
Well, I mean, at least the National Socialists had an ethos.
Well, I
Do you
agreed.
know what I'm? No,
I'm no, I agreed. I'm not.
do
I'm
you know
not.
what
I'm
I'm
not.
quoting? Do you know
Yeah,
what
well,
I'm
I know
quoting from?
exactly what you're quoting. Yeah,
Yeah,
say
okay.
what you want, dude. Say what you want about the National Socialists. At least they had an ethos, right? Better than the nihilists, right? So, yeah, we're talking the Big Lebowski here, folks. And if you haven't seen it, well, it's like it's like one of the greatest lines of dialogue of all time.
Yeah.
But and coming out of the mouth of Walter,
Yeah,
who
it's
as a
the best.
character is himself a pure distillation of so much American insanity, right?
Oh my, the boomer. He's like the perfect boomer.
Yeah, he truly is. But from a but it's funny. Like when I realized, well, I've said this before. I realized 20 years ago when I was active in the Libertarian Party that this was a useless process, that this a useless thing, that we were never going to become a thing. And you brought up Ron Paul, and I understood that Ron was way early in the process. That there's the awakening of a critical mass of people, or even a subcritical mass of people, and it reaches a certain point, and then it doesn't have answers. In sociology and in branding and marketing, they talk about the 16% chasm, right? Where you can get any movement and any new product can get up to about 16% market share. But then to go from 16% to 40%, to go from, hey, this iPhone thing's kind of cool, to the iPhone takes over the world, that requires a different moment. It requires a different strategy. And the libertarians never had this, which is, it's one thing to be against the government or against a certain thing. You can get 16% being against something. I told Lou Rockwell this ages ago. I said, Lou, you have to rebrand all of this in a positive manner if you want to take this thing to the next level. It's, you have to go from being against something to then offering the solution to the problem, and to being and the perfect example of this would be, for me, I use this all the time, is Alternative for Germany. In Germany, the AfD party, the first time they moved up, they got up to 16% because they were the anti-Merkel party, and then they couldn't cross the 16% chasm because they didn't switch to becoming the "we know how to fix Germany for Germans" party. Now that they've started to do that, they're in the low 20s and pushing higher, and now the big guns are coming against them. And that's
even
where the
Marine
fight
Le
starts.
Pen, even
What's that?
Marine Le Pen in France is coming against them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you would think, oh, Marine Le Pen was called a Nazi, in the whole Trump era and everything. Oh,
Right.
she was one of the Nazis, her and Orban and all these people. And
Right.
now that AfD is like is rising up, even she's going,
Right.
because they're talking about mass deportations.
One dude talked about mass deportations at a meeting that may or may not actually have occurred, and then was, filtered through the European press, which is wholly in the tank for the
Yeah.
fucking globalists. And now we have this thing, and then George Soros pays a couple 100,000 people to show up in Berlin and protest, and then it's everywhere. Like, dude, we already learned this with the 1 million-person march, which was never 1 million people. It was only 200 grand. That, I mean, they can call up 250,000 people to march on Washington D.C. for any reason whatsoever. You put a bunch of money in front of people, you can get this you can activate that many people.
Okay, and
So,
now apply that, and the libertarians can't get what?
well, no, of course the libertarians can't get that, because the barrier to entry, and this is where the criticism of how the government functions and how central planning functions, that steals all the activation energy for something new. But then every once in a while it breaks through. And then you have something like the Canadian truckers, and now the German farmers and the Dutch farmers. And so, well, I firmly agree with you about the efficacy of, any of these of the pure, my problem is the purists that are trying to hold on to this thing that is completely irrelevant. I mean, Pete, we've been doing this for how long?
You
Open
longer
borders
than me, probably.
nearly destroyed the party back in the 80s,
Yeah.
and they're still arguing about it.
Mhm.
Why? Because one is a pure position, and the other one is a practical position in the context of the modern world. Remember that even Murray Rothbard was a heretic towards the end because he said you can't have open borders with a welfare state and a warfare state. And then he died, and all the left libertarians freaked out. So,
Well, first they celebrated that he died, and then they freaked out.
well, okay, fine, fair enough.
Yeah. The the thing that always, once you start getting past the whole okay, what do we believe? And then you get to, okay, how do we make this work? I think the problem with me, the biggest problem I've had with libertarians is that even if you, I mean, it's like the dog that catches the car and doesn't know what to do with it. It's, well, if you did get there, what exactly what would you do? And more importantly, how would you keep it?
Right.
I mean, that's the biggest problem that I see is, you know, I look at, like, if I wasn't married and I could live anywhere in the world right now, if I had no attachments and I could live anywhere in the world right now, I'd like to live in, like, Singapore.
Mm.
Why? Because their economy's pretty good, pretty much free market, a pretty free market economy, but also they have a culture that you don't chew gum in public.
Right.
If you do, you don't spit it on the sidewalk or you get caned. They know how to keep their civilization. They know how to keep order. They know how to do things that we don't hear. And they also, and strangely, they have it's not as multicultural as we have, but they do have a multicultural society. And somehow order, I've talked to people who are like, yeah, I dropped my wallet and someone ran 2 blocks to give it back to me. I asked someone for directions and they walked me to the place I was going to. And it's like, well, that's the kind of culture I want. Well, that's not the culture. There's nothing in this culture now, except maybe if you're in a very, very small town, that would lend itself to that. And here's the thing. When you ask the question of, if you get to where you want to go, how do you keep it? The real answer should be, you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't even have to write laws down.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to write laws down, it's only to formalize what you already believe, what the ethos is, that word again, of the community that's coming together.
Yep.
And when you look at it's one of the reasons why the 2 friends that I made when I moved to this town, the first 2 friends, and I didn't do this on purpose. They were just really cool guys. Their families have been here over 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
Their families settled, one of their families settled this place. They own, like probably a quarter to 40% of the property in town. They have an interest in this town staying safe and staying open for business.
Right.
It's sort of like Liechtenstein. You know how Hoppe talks about Liechtenstein, how you have Prince Hans Adams, now his son has taken over, and because basically that family owns the whole town, owns the principality, basically everything in it. They have it's in their best interest that it stays safe, that they
Right.
control who comes in and out. I have a friend, they have a lottery there every once in a while. I have a friend who's a German citizen, and they have a lottery there every once in a while to become a resident. And he won the lottery.
Mm.
And he's like, it was the biggest celebration. And like, he comes on my live streams every once in a while and, comments and talks about what's happening in Liechtenstein, and he'll hit me up and it's like one of the freest places on the planet. Well, why? Because they have a monoculture and they don't allow people in who are going to screw it up. There's your
Exactly.
biggest problem of having libertarianism in the United States. The Civil
Well,
Rights Act took away freedom of association.
well, agreed. We have so many. We have an administrative state and a regulatory state that is designed to break down borders between people. When I was when I was doing practical politics in Gainesville, Florida, so Alachua County uh, of Florida, I would go to the county commission meetings, right? And we have a bunch of communists on this county commission at the time. Now, I now have a joint city and county commission. This is a county so friggin' authoritarian and so far up the asses of the DNC that half the county wants to break off and become a different county. It's the movement's kind of dying on the vine because they can't get it through the legislature, the Florida legislature, but doesn't matter. It's there. And the last time a new county was created in Florida was a secession movement from Alachua County. Gilchrist County seceded in 1925 from Alachua County, right? Because they were communists then. Okay. So, but I remember back then watching them pass their new land use rules, which were a superset of the new rules coming from Tallahassee, which were in and of themselves tyrannical. And then these guys were like, ooh, we can use these in every way imaginable. They were trying to manipulate the rules in order to destroy people's trying to create enclaves. And so we have Neil Stevenson called them burbclaves in Snow Crash, right? Where you have like gated communities and private security and all the rest of it, and basically private towns were propping up all around the outskirts of the city of Gainesville. And what did they do? They went out of their way to write the rules such that they could force their way in to make multiple entrances to those towns, which only had one off the main road. They wanted to have, and they used emergency services as the excuse as to why they needed to have multiple entrances. And they literally sat up there amongst themselves. I remember watching Dave Newport and Penny Wheat and Mike Byerly and all these fucking horrible people gleefully go, so we're agreed, we're against having these types of communities in our county, and we need to break them down. So it was at that moment that I'm like, we're never going to stop this. Like, this is a waste of our time. But again, at the same time, you also know that this is not a sustainable process either. See, everything is a process, everything is a cycle, and we've reached the kind of the apex of, I think, tyrannical thought within our culture, within our society. And we're at the worst moment. And this is when, of course, ideas like the counter ideas are when they have to be presented in such a way that they are practical and shown to be a proper, I think, alternative to the crazy that we see today. They have to go all the way to the end where they deny us private property rights, even in our own bodies, that they can, they can force. They're going to move to forcible gender reassignment at some point. They're going to say, well, there's not enough men, so we need to make a whole bunch of women into men, or there's not enough women, and we're going to need to make a whole bunch of. They're going to go there, and if not, then they'll just say, well, we need to kill off certain numbers of men in order to balance the sexes, because that's the way they're going to go, because that's the logical endpoint of their identitarianism, right? So think of it this way, Pete: we're at the peak of it. And then it is the people who have gone all the way through libertarianism and come out the other side are the ones that are going to have the best ideas about how to practically implement the counter to these insanely tyrannical impulses that are part of the cycle that we're living through. Because you have to go all the way to the end for everybody to go, that's not what we want, and then they can come back the other way. And this is a long, long conversation that takes place over the course of multiple generations, I think. Yeah. And that's been my thesis for a very long time. That's why I won't give up the label of being a libertarian philosophically, because I do believe that the decentralization of power is ultimately, and the individual is ultimately, the path to, some form of cultural stability and personal enlightenment. But, living in a dark age, it's very hard to see that.
Well, as my friend Warren McIntyre says, the only way we're going to get out of this is through. Mm-hmm. We got to go head first. What I've been trying to, in the last year, by trying to come up with as much practicality as I can, get out of cities, buy property, get out of debt, that kind of thing. I believe the future, and the pretty immediate future in my lifetime, is either going to be right or left wing authoritarianism.
Agreed.
I'm sorry. Agreed, right?
Agreed.
So I'm hoping for right, but preparing for both.
Excellent.
Okay. That's the way. I mean, anyone who thinks I had somebody, you get, and I know the kind of libertarians you're talking about. I was talking to someone on Twitter the other day who was saying that, he saw, Ancapistan within the next 30 years. And I'm like, who's telling you this? You're not coming to this on your own. So who's telling you this? You can't possibly, either that or and I don't want to straw man people. This sounds insulting. You still live at home, and through 2020, through COVID, you weren't really, put out because you lived at home. You weren't like us, those of us who had to, still pay bills. And I still had a job through COVID, still had a full-time job through COVID. You don't remember that. I mean, February of 2020, I was doing episodes saying that this was going to be worse than 9/11. That I saw that this was going to be more, this is going to be more change the culture and more than 9/11. And I said, and the worst thing about this, I mean, you can go back and listen to the episodes. The worst thing about this was going to be is that they were going to weaponize us against each other.
Right.
The police disappeared where I lived in 2020. The police disappeared through COVID, through especially through those early months of COVID. I mean, you'd see them driving, but you wouldn't see. They weren't enforcing anything. They weren't going to supermarkets and enforcing mask mandates. The people were doing that.
Yep.
Your neighbor was looking at you like, "What do you want to kill me?"
Right.
They knew exactly what they were doing. So I, I've come to realize that, especially, after, whatever. Does this go up on YouTube?
No, it will not.
Okay. Yeah. So the election, well, the summer of George, where they just let basically people riot and burn down. And I mean, almost 40 Americans were murdered in the streets in 2020. No one wants to talk about that.
Right.
Buildings were burned down. Whole towns were almost, looked to be set on fire. Then you had the election, which, I mean, anybody with a brain in their head knows that it was totally fucked. And then you had January 6th. And you're like, if you don't see that from that we're growing towards totalitarianism, and then Biden gives that speech with stormtroopers on both sides in a red background,
Right.
and basically says half of America is fascist, is semi-fat. Oh no, he called them semi-fascist. I'm like, no, don't call me semi-fascist. Give me the whole. I want all the credit.
Yeah.
But then you look at things like that, and then you look at the reaction to, oh, we're going to have this thing in Ukraine that we're going to support. And if you don't support that wholeheartedly, you're un-American. Oh, wait a minute, something happened in Israel. Let's switch. Now, if you don't support that, we're going towards authoritarianism. We're already there to a certain extent, but we're not there to the point that most people can see it. We will be there soon. The only question is whether it's left or right. I have a tendency to believe it's going to be right wing, because as you talked about, the forced transgender, the transgenderism. I mean, the transgenderism is just advertising. It's just Bernays. It's just Lipman. That's all it is. It's putting it out there and putting it in, and making people, well, oh, so you don't really have any purpose in life anymore. Well, if you change your sex, now you're going to get attention. People are going to look at you, and there's a group of people that are going to call you a hero. They're going to call you heroic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's just inevitable that there is going to be a right-wing reaction to it. And as far as I'm concerned, we're so left right now with the culture that I don't even know if it's going to be, if you could even snap it all the way back to the other side of the right. It may just be like right of center kind of thing. But no, I mean, where have we seen this before? I hate to bring it up because everyone brings it up, but it's something that I've studied over the last couple of years because I think it's relevant. Everybody, libertarians, when they talk about Weimar Germany, they talk about the inflation. That's what they don't want to talk about the first transgender clinic in the world, transgender surgeries. They don't want to talk about mother-daughter prostitution teams on the streets. They don't want to talk about people having sex with animals on the streets. They don't want to talk about how the place had just turned into a, a shithole.
Right.
And that something was going to give. And it's like I like to say, the German people, they weren't particularly, even though they supported the National Socialists after 1933, they weren't particularly enamored by him. They really liked Uncle Adolf,
Mm-hmm.
but they weren't enamored by him. They just saw them as their savior from this god awful shit that they came into. So, when you look at what's happening now, I mean, I don't think Donald Trump is that guy. I don't think Donald Trump has the balls to do anything. And his balls were cut off for 4 years anyway.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen? I mean, of course he wouldn't be able to run again, so he could do a bunch of things if he had the will. I don't think he has that kind of will to power to do stuff like that. But somebody's going to come along eventually on the right, and they're going to start talking about America and what America was and American heritage and who infiltrated America. How did this happen? Where did it start? And people are going to start waking up to it, and they're going to support this guy. And you're going to see some authoritarianism. You're going to see some right wing authoritarianism. And you're going to see some cracking down on this shit. But if it goes in the other direction, left wing, then you're just going to have an acceleration of what's happening now. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And, the libertarian, I will give you the libertarian answer to what I just said. Well,
Okay.
I don't want either of them. No, I don't want either of them. Of course you don't want either of them, stupid.
No one
I don't
does.
want, well, no one does. But it's inevitable for as to what has been happening, especially since World War II. You just see this growing insanity in the culture, this abandonment of the family, abandonment of people going to church,
Mm-hmm.
feminism, Civil Rights Act, all this stuff. I mean, is it any wonder that you had the Civil Rights Act in 1965, and in 1968, you had teachers being set on fire in New York City public schools? 3 years later,
Right.
what happened? And then you go off the gold standard. You go off the gold standard, and then basically the currency starts to inflate. So women have to leave the home now. There's no
Mm-hmm.
woman at home. I was a latchkey kid. I was coming home to an empty home at 8.
Yeah.
At 8 years old, I was coming home to an empty home, and I'd be there for 3-4 hours before my parents got home from work.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't expect this. Where do you expect this to go? It's either going to accelerate and stay in this leftward motion, which to me, the left means chaos, or someone on the right is going to rise up and seek to put it back in order. And if unless it all falls apart at once, and then if it all falls apart at once, you're going to have a war. You're going to have violence.
Well, these are a lot of the options, and I do agree with you that these are most of the likely outcomes here. I've been warning people for a long time that that as we go through this, and I've been saying this to men, and I'm not like I haven't really done a lot of this, but what I've been saying, and I've come more and more to the conclusion of this. This is part of the whole argument about, getting your local communities in order and everything else, is men have to become solid again. Okay. We have to become solid. Women want us to be solid. They want us to be,
Protectors.
unmovable and imperturbable,
Yeah.
and ready to face whatever's coming, and give them the security that they need to be able to do. The part of the reason why we're dealing with what we're dealing with today is that women just don't feel like the men are up to snuff. Okay. And they're right. And they've been pushed into this idea that they can be and then they've been, told by feminists that they can be just as, they can be more men than men. Like it's not. No one should be confused about what's been going on here. This has been This has been an operation that spanned multiple generations now. But the way you get out of this, and one of the things I've been saying is like, we don't want to become the Fremen from Dune, where our grievances are so deep and so abiding that we wind up being like the Houthis that are just willing to, effectively be high all the time and fight like freaking mad dogs with because they have no other opportunity. They have no other way of reacting, of dealing with the world, because they've had everything else taken away from them. They've been driven into the deep desert. I mean, the story here is completely analogous to what Herbert was talking about in Dune, right? Well, we have the same potential problem here of, if you push people too far, you're going to get that kind of abreaction that you just described. And the way we avoid that is by not taking the bait. If you look on the world stage, I was talking with Alex Craner and about this in one podcast I did recently. Alex and I did a couple of them, so I can't remember which one I did. I think it was on Sean Newman's podcast. We discussed this for a while. I said, Alex was going through the entire process of Nazification of the West, and it's hard to argue with his argument. As a matter of fact, if you want to, you should probably have Alex on your show. You probably have a lovely time, lovely chat about this very particular thing.
What's his name?
His name is Alex Craner, Krainer, Alex Craner. I've done dozens of shows with Alex. I've had him on my show a number of times, and but what I said in response to that is, what we have to do is not take the bait, and so we have to look geopolitically at who are the men who are just being solid, who are the men that aren't really, who are attempting to take all the slings and arrows, take all the provocations, take them all and go, you know what? No. Putin, Viktor Orban, and a handful of others. And there's not very, very many. Part of what
Assad is
another perfect example of a guy who's just saying,
he's my favorite world leader right now.
Okay. Yeah, no, I would put Assad in that mix as well. He's just a guy who's like, you know what, you can say everything you want about me, but I'm not going to change. And eventually I am going to empower my allies, such as they are, to get rid of the invaders. And I'm going to do everything I have to do over time. And I'm playing the long game. And no matter what you do, it won't matter. You can bomb the Damascus airport again and we'll rebuild it, Israel, and it will not matter. You can blame it on, you can try and get, me offside. It won't work. Now the Russians are finally are starting to tell the Israelis, oh, by the way, that airspace is now closed because he's taking the gloves off of Syrian air defense forces and yada, yada, yada. So you can see this stuff happening, right? So that's how we avoid these outcomes that you put in front of us. And I'm not saying that they're the likely outcome, that we're going to be able to not do this, because history is littered with examples of where it doesn't happen, right? Where we did fail and we did wind up like a la Nazi Germany and other examples of it. So, but if we as libertarians have a role to play in this, it is this critique. And this comes directly out of non-aggression principle style thinking. Okay. And I think that's where I'm most frustrated with the national, whatever the national movement is, or whatever, whatever the remnant of this is like, look, you've become abreacting monkeys. We know exactly how you're going to react to X, Y, and Z. You're going to invoke some dumb. I remember David Boaz writing an article ages ago saying, don't become a knee-jerk libertarian. Right? And always look for the hidden authoritarianism in whatever the issue of the day is, and then go, oh, well, that doesn't comport perfectly, so therefore bad, therefore fascist, therefore this. Like, no. Like, I'm not anybody's favorite in this community anymore, because I'm like, I can see strategically why the Fed would be our ally in the short term, simply because the Fed is also under existential threat for its own existence. And so this is where We have the tools to do the analysis and to show everybody where the breakpoints are and where the problems lie, and yet we're not using them. That's the greatest failure of libertarianism, in my mind.
I can't remember who it was I was listening to the other day, but they were saying that someone said everybody's waiting for like the regime to fall apart, for it to all break down, and everybody believes that at that time their ideology is what's going to be adopted by the masses, without realizing that if everything breaks down, you're not going to like, okay, well, let's figure out what to do here. No, you already have to have it working. You
Yes.
already have to have a working model, and a model that you can point to and go, look how this has been working. Look how this has been working out for us. This is what we're going to do. You also have to be able to say, this is what we're going to do, which is a problem that libertarians have.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to say, step up and say, look, we already, guard is on our side. This is what we're going to do. And I do believe that the future is decentralized. I believe that once this starts falling apart, you're going to see things start cracking up, definitely getting down to more. And the reason that has to happen is not only because it's easier to manage small groups than it's easier to manage 20, my town of 2,400 than it is to manage 350 million. It's also because people need to have a coherent culture to rally around.
Yep.
And when you have a culture where it's like, I mean, I've gotten to the point now where I'm like, economics is secondary to me to culture. We can figure if we're together and we're relying upon each other, we can figure out what works best for us. It's like I put out a tweet that really pissed off the libertarians, because I still have a lot of libertarians that follow me, that said, your opinion on economics isn't what makes you right wing. Your opinion on the Civil Rights Act does.
Yep.
And what I was doing was I was putting culture in front of economics, and that freaks people out. And I know economics is your thing, and economics is really really fucking important. But the fact is that if you're not looking at the socio-political, and if you don't solve the socio-political, and if you have socio-political problems, you can have the best economics in the world and it's going to go to shit. I mean, I have a tendency to believe that, if you have a very wealthy society, it's going to tend to degeneracy because you have so much money. It's like, because there's so much riches. Look at these people. They want to talk about Epstein's plane and everything, and people having sex with kids and everything. It's like, isn't half of that just because I've done everything else? Now I'm just going to do the taboo stuff in the world and everything. Culture means so much. It's
what's interesting, Pete, is when I actually have been saying this, which is that economics is downstream of culture. It's not upstream of culture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like but the two go hand in hand. Like, they ultimately do. I mean, a corrupt money begets a corrupt society, which is a fair critique. But at the same time, it's also the mechanism by which central planning corrupts everything as well. It's like everything is, but we allow this to happen over time. Okay. Because we lose our ability to differentiate between what's important and what's not important. Like, look at the purity spiral of the modern identitarian left. Think about where they've gone. Think about what Ayn Rand said all those years ago, that that the smallest minority is the individual, so therefore we should protect that one, right? Well, then let's take it one step further, and let's think about some of the stuff that Jordan Peterson got famous for saying, which is now kind of taboo, which is that these people are breaking themselves into ever smaller and smaller groups in order to eventually get to the point where, well, there is no ethos left. There's just a whole bunch of individuals running around having subdivided themselves into individual little grouplets. until there are no grouplets left. There's just one person with all of their traits, and I'm a crypto anarchist, transgender, Marxist, anarchist, flower arranger from the West Texas, like, or whatever. You don't understand? At the end of the day, you're like, no, you're just Pete. You're
Mhm.
just Tom. And so do we have to have a rules for Pete and Tom? Like, this is so at the end of the day, when you and like all of this invariably winds up in the same place once it goes all the way to the end. But they've lost, at both sides have lost the script, right? And it's the people in the middle. They're going, oh, by the way, we're all individuals, but I'm not. Life of Brian, right? And I know we all want to be members of a community of like-minded people that mostly agree on the rules, and everything we don't agree about, we can negotiate a settlement on, and that should happen. However under whatever terms we need to. The problem with law, I've always said this, is the problem with law is that only the law as written defines the one point where where that group of people are maximally advantaged, and by that particular law. So the law says X, right? You can do this up to this limit, right? You can pollute up to this limit. Well, the people who want to pollute to that limit are the ones that get maximal freedom out of that law. Everybody who wants to pollute more is tyrannized, and everybody who wants to produce less is tyrannized by the people who pollute up to the limit. Like the whole thing is this insane logic trap that eventually breaks down. So the law itself is its own problem fundamentally. I've always said that all laws are dangerous and stupid because of that. But at the same time, we have to have rules, and we have to have the ability to not always look at ourselves and to define our relationships beyond just the individual little particular thing that's our problem at this moment in time. We have to take the totality of the relationship between two individuals, between two groups, or whatever, and effectively decide, okay, I can live with that abrogation, but not that abrogation of my particular right, or I can have the right to walk away. What I'm really worried about is that all of this is being used against us to drive us completely and irretrievably fucking insane.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that we wind up
Oh yeah.
arguing about this shit that's not important,
Yeah.
and they run the table on us behind the scenes.
That's why once on Sundays I do a live stream where I just talk to everybody and I just talk to them like their friend. I look at the chat and I answer their questions. Don't
Mhm.
particularly pick a subject, just what's on your mind. And if you have a problem, I'm trying to try and figure out a way to make you realize that it's a lot of it is meant for demoralization.
Yes,
I wanted to go back to
that's
something you were talking.
that's a very important word.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
want and I want to focus on this from here going forward, because I've been on the Great Reset morphed into the Great Awakening, which morphed into the Great Acceleration, which is serving the Great Demoralization.
Right. So what you have is so if you go on Twitter, and basically Twitter now has replaced what CNN, MSNBC, all these, and people go to Twitter for their news. People used to say, "Oh, Twitter isn't real life." It might not be real life, but it definitely is politics. It definitely is where narratives go to grow. It definitely is where propaganda is spouted. It's one of the biggest demoralization tools on the planet, and basically they want you to believe it's worse than it is. Now, the government is worse than it is because, like we talked about, it's a hydra. It's like, I mean, the only thing that's going to really stop it is either a strong man who's willing to put everything on the line, or it's going to die on its own, and then it'll be reborn in some way, um, unless somebody has an alternative set in place to replace it. But the demoralization thing is they put in front of our eyes they want us to believe that things are worse than they are. So, there's this video going around of these, what look like older kids kicking the shit out of this young kid until he starts going into convulsions and apparently he died. And they just dragged him out into the street. And stuff like this happens every day, but now we get to see it, and they want us to see it. They want us to see what's going on in Gaza. They want us to see um, these trans. I mean, TikTok is demoralization. I mean, the greatest tool for demoralization that I've ever seen. Because if you go on there, you might see somebody talking about economics, and you're like, that makes sense. Okay, you see someone talking about, that makes sense. Then you're going to see a drag queen talking about how they're going to get your kids. Then you see a teacher with purple hair talking about how they're going to they're going to make your kid gay and everything. And it's like this the reason you're seeing this, the reason why that's put up in the algo so high, and the reason why it's going to eventually make its way to Twitter is that you don't have hope.
Mm-hmm.
And hope is one thing that when I look back on World War II, and I always go back to World War II with this, is the United States chose to fight alongside and support the greatest enemy of mankind at that time, and that was Bolshevism. And by allowing them to win, it basically gave credibility to their ethos, and their ethos has crept its way into basically everything. And if you want to know where transgenderism comes from, it doesn't come directly from there, but it definitely would not have happened if it wasn't for this kind of subjective morality and this kind of tabula rasa idea, blank slate idea, this kind of progressive idea where man can be perfected, where, people are born a blank slate, and, their parents are the worst thing because their parents instill them with all these values that are against, the book The Authoritarian Personality 1950 talks about how are we going to stop people from becoming fascists? Well, we have to break down the family, we have to feed them porn, we have to all these things. The way to defeat fascism is to do all of this. Fast forward 74 years. I mean, they won.
Mm-hmm.
They won. And part of what the Bolsheviks did was demoralization. You knew that you knew where your neighbor was taken. You knew that Stalin just put bullets in the heads of his 10 closest advisors. You knew that basically you had no hope, that this is what reality was now, until it's not that reality anymore.
Right.
But
Well.
it takes being able to understand, being able to recognize what we are, where we are, and the fact that this in the box ideology that you may possess, that you worship, that has become your religion, has become your God, that will never exist in reality. You may hope it to inspire your reality and inspire the politics that's around you at some point, but that it's not going to exist like this. And you do not have the tools to go up against those people who own the narrative, own propaganda, have the halls of academia, have the halls of power, have the media, until you either take all of those things over, or until you you break the spell inside your head to go,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not gonna yeah, this is all bullshit.
Right.
I can see that this is all bullshit. And you know what? The only reason it's affecting my life right now is because I'm watching it. And I think that it's real. I think that it has something to do with me, which is why I tell people get the fuck out of cities, because that's where you're going to see the most of this stuff in cities.
Mm-hmm.
Get out of cities, get into a smaller town. Um, you have to break the spell. You have to um, something I wrote here that I want to insert here is I truly believe that we get the government that we deserve. And
Agreed.
when you look at this government, what is this government? This government is a bunch of greedy people, a bunch of self-interested people, a bunch of people who desire to um, to basically live their life, well, let's just stay with greedy and selfish.
Yeah.
Okay. Look around you in your personal life. How many people do you know like that? How many people do you know who live like that? Look at the culture in general. Look at the United States. What do we worship profit? We worship, 200 years ago, if you talked about profit in an Anglo in an Anglo environment, that was rude. Nobody talked about the profit they were making. Oh, you know how much I made this week? Profit I made this week in my tailor shop?
Right.
You were looked down upon. You were trash. We worship this kind of stuff. We worship materialism. We worship all this stuff, and then we do it. We get people like us get elected to office, and we expect them to like get rid of all that.
Right.
This is the culture the government, the way the government is right now is the culture we live in. It's a reflection of the culture we live in. You talked about men becoming men, it reminds me of Francis Parkayaki, picture of him directly over my head. His quote about feminism said, feminism took away the natural dignity of women and turned them into inferior men.
Yes.
And what was he saying? He was saying, he wasn't saying this specifically, but one of the reasons, I mean, feminism was a direct assault. It was planned. It was part of that whole authoritarian personality thing. But women want their men to be strong. Women want their men to make decisions and say, this is where we're going to do it. And if it goes wrong, I'm going to take responsibility for it.
Right.
Women want strong men. I mean, look in DC. Do any of those guys, do you think any of those guys are that way at home? I look at like male politicians and I figure they're just cucked at home.
Mm-hmm.
I figure the women are in charge at home. But we just don't it's a breakdown of humanity, of who we are. If we want to see a better, if we want to see better leaders, if we want to see better, rulers to use a term to make libertarians shit their pants, we need to have better people. We just need to be a better culture. We
Sure.
need to champion things that are no longer championed, like being honest, being brave, being strong, taking responsibility, being able to say, I was wrong, I made a mistake, I'm going to change it. I mean, when I started leaving libertarianism, I could not believe how many people who needed to stay inside that box to, I don't know, satisfy their, to deal with their autism because, it doesn't allow all
Mm-hmm.
these variables or whatever. I couldn't believe how many of them were like, how could you change your mind? It's like, wait, what?
Well, guess what? It's no different than the shit libs who have fallen out with Biden and the rest of them, and all of them going, and they're all going, how could you walk away from the LG, the gays and all of this, and we finally won. We're here. Like, no, this is not what I asked for. You said, and I love this. We get the government we deserve, which I agree with completely. It's a reflection of who we are. By the way, a long, long time ago, coming out of a very interesting person's mouth in a rare moment of real honesty on a press junket for a movie. I cannot remember what movie he was supporting at the time, but Harrison Ford, of all people, said, when pressed in an interview about why he does what he's like, look, we get the stories we deserve. My job is to try and he didn't and implicit in that was I'm trying to tell stories that matter.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, we get the stories we deserve. Now, this was when he was at the height of his power. So I think it might have been in a press junket for like Fragile or one of the little movies that he did. He did one for them, like Clint Eastwood did one for them and one for himself, right? Over and over and over again.
Right.
So for every Air Force One, there was Fragile. For every another Indiana Jones movie, there was Regarding Henry or whatever, right? And we could see it then in the way the stories and our culture is a reflection of the stories that we began telling, and it's why I watched that part of the process. I'm looking for the turn, right? And I'm looking for anybody who's creating stories that go against the dominant agenda of, for lack of a better term, Bolshevism. And you can always see it, and you see it, and as bad as like Rotten Tomatoes is as a thing, the only use it has at this point is to show the disconnect between the people responding to the thing and the gatekeepers who are the critics. And then you also made a point earlier about the algorithms and the various social media platforms and how certain things are amplified. Been a thesis of mine for a long time now that one of the things that they're actively trying to destroy is anything that gives us comfort or a blueprint for the future. I firmly believe that they're destroying Disney on purpose. Okay. I firmly believe that the boys who were triggered by being told that they're shit and not up to snuff in the last set of Star Wars films, which is all the millennials, by the way, they got triggered, and then they were purposefully amplified by YouTube, by Twitter, by all of it, in order to create this, in order to divide the fandom, in order to divide everything, and then into this toxic mix, of course, of Gen Xers and Boomers who wanted, who could feel everything slipping away, saw what they wanted to see as opposed to what was actually being presented. And I'm not making a defense of, individually, of making a defense of whether or not objectively they are great films or not. But what they're saying, what they said was the older generation wasn't up to snuff. They allowed this chaos to happen. There was a reversal of gender roles. And what a shock. We almost literally were completely destroyed. And the old wound, the old enemies never stopped, never left, and sat there working the i.e. Palpatine, working underneath the entire time. And it's funny. It's important that we see these things this way. And, we're going to look back on this period of history and wonder, how did we go so fucking crazy? The same way that the Germans are still saying it today, to themselves today, which is why, for example, Alternative for Germany can be, easily slapped down over, one little incident, because there's a hypersensitivity to the idea of them ever becoming, like they were back in the 30s ever again. And it still hasn't worked its way out of the society. On the other side, we have another example of a society, for all of its faults, and it still has many, which hit rock bottom after the end of Bolshevism for real, went through 10 years of exactly what you just described, what happened during Weimar Germany, Russia, and now the restoration of culture is coming back. I was just speaking to Larry Johnson yesterday, who just came back from Moscow. And he was talking about these things, and it'll be on the pod. It's in episode 167. We're talking about how everything's changed, how the city is clean, how people are nice, how they're building churches, and the kids take the parents to church because the parents are fallen, because the grandparents are fallen because they lived under this this insanity and this insane violence, this insane authoritarian lunacy. And the abreaction, or not the abreaction, but the natural progression is to reject that and then come back in the opposite direction. We're approaching the moment where they were at the end. I think we're probably in like the early 1980s Soviet Union is where we are now. And we're being purposefully torn apart at the seams, the same way that we were pushing the Soviet Union into failure economically and politically and everything else. Well, they're doing the same thing to us. And not just the Russians, but also the old Europeans and the Chinese and everybody else, for their own purposes. And the problem, I think, with that model is that they should be very careful what they wish for, because they just might get it. Because as bad as the United States is, at its core, there's still an ethos of that it isn't as bad as our government is acting. And we, as a people, aren't that bad. There's still a very, very strong core of people who believe in community and family and everything else. Look, when I think about what's happened this week in Texas, I don't give a damn whether Greg Abbott is enforcing the border or is not enforcing the border. I give a fuck. Okay, that's not what's important. What's important was the statement by everybody else that they were going to come to Texas's aid, that the truckers were all moving to the border, that this is happening, that these 17 states pledged to put troops on the friggin' border to protect it. That there was this last moment of saying, look, we're not going this route. We're not going to let you do this to us. And one of the things we were just chatting in my this morning in my private discussion server about this, and I said, Greg Abbott may be doing exactly what the WEF wants him to do, which is to stoke a constitutional crisis in order to accelerate the breakup of the United States, which is exactly what they want. But he may be swept along by the force of us saying, you know what? No, we're not doing that. And he may actually have to lead be one of the leaders of a movement out of the darkness that he doesn't even believe in. And yeah, he'll be a snake in the grass, and yeah, he'll be a pain in the ass and everything else, but he's replaceable. Because I think that's far more important. It's not what's happening that's important. It's what's happening means that's important. So that's the way that's it. I mean, I'm trying to I'm not disagreeing with you, Pete. What I'm trying to do is throw counter examples back and forth here, because this is everything's in flux. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult for us to figure out what is and is not really happening, because so little of what we see is fucking real.
Well, what I will say is that, a lot of people, when they look at the Texas thing, and I'll use the Texas thing to make a broader point.
Sure.
They're like, oh, well, what kind of law can come out of this? Well, we already have laws. No one follows them. The only way change is going to be made, in at least the short term, is by people saying no.
Yes.
Just say no.
Yeah.
I mean, just
be solid.
No. Yeah.
Say no.
Just say no. I mean, just be like, no, you're not going to do that. And I don't care what the Supreme Court said. And that's basically what he's saying. He's saying, I don't care what the Supreme Court said.
Yeah.
I don't care what Trump's Supreme Court, which voted for open borders, said. I mean, it's
we all know how the game is actually played, which is that these people, like Amy Coney Barrett, I worried about her from the moment I found out she had 7 kids.
Yeah, and that a bunch of them were adopted, and that they were
basically she has 7 children.
Well, she had handbags. She has handbags, just like so many of the like Angelina Jolie, where she has to. Oh, I got different colors from different countries.
That's not what I meant. What I meant is she has 7 children.
That's what I mean.
Even if you're generous to her and say she's honestly a mom of 7, those are 7 vectors of intimidation. Okay. You want to be, let's be generous here. She's a mom, and we don't know how the fucking game is played. Yeah. You don't do what we want, we throw your ass down the stairs. We hire a large Mexican and we pay him $50 to throw your ass down the stairs. Harry Reid, John Roberts, Mitch McConnell, blah 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 blah. They've all shown. Olaf Scholz shows up one day with an eye patch on because he was thrown down the stairs because he wouldn't support Ukraine for a week, or he went and met with the Russians. This is the way the game is played, and the more we just talk about it this way, the more we see it in real time. The more they out themselves as just being, oh, well, no, we're going to save democracy by doing away with it. Fuck what? Really? Huh? That's interesting. That that level of hypocrisy, of disingenuousness, of whatever you want to call it, mendacity, whatever you want to call it, is. Look, you don't have to be a friggin' IQ 140, member of fucking Mensa or 160 member of Mensa to figure this shit out. It's just real. And everybody knows I live in rural North Florida. Every person that I talk to, every real person I talk to, doesn't matter what race they are, doesn't matter. Every time I have somebody come out to fix something around my house or whatever, they're all ready for it. They are all ready for the change. And I tell them all the same thing. Don't take the bait. Just say no. Just be ungovernable. This is what libertarians should be saying. Say no. Find your way. If we can't we can't solve the big problems, solve the small ones. You solve the small ones, well, look, where you are is a node of stability. Around you is a node of stability, being solid. And then that radiates outward. So that when if the collapse happens, great. Well, we have a network. We can survive.
Yeah. I mean,
we all have skills.
Make yourself bulletproof and then start basket weaving. If you understand what basket weaving means, is when you start weaving together separate elements, you become stronger. And that's called, having a network. And having a local network is really important, which is, I think one of the biggest problems that a lot of people have, and I've seen this in my personal life, not me personally. I mean, I've always had in real life friends, but I think a lot of people, especially libertarians, do not have in real life friends. A lot of the normal, so they're basically their whole existence is online. Everybody adheres to the ideology. And if you break from that, if you're like, oh, well, I don't know, I think we should start looking at this a little more practically than just worrying about theory and everything. Well, you can lose your friend group. And if you lose your friend group and all your friends are online, well, now you're out on an island. You don't have anybody in real life. I mean, I can call 3 people right now and go hang out with them if I wanted to. And, I mean, it's a little early to have, to have some whiskey, but, start a little early. But the thing is like, you cannot, you need people. And when you tell libertarians that, they'll be like, well, that's just collectivism. And it's like, well, I mean, it's really not, it's.
Is it coercive? Then it's not collectivism, you fucking moron. Like,
well,
how dumb, what part of the voluntary association between people did you not understand? Like, what the hell's wrong with you? This is, another one of these things. It's a purity spiral. And I'm not interested and I'm never interested in a purity spiral. I don't care where it comes from.
Yeah. I mean, and even like, people being like, okay, I'll pledge to, if you have a group of people, we'll pledge to pay your bills if you get canceled or something like that, and we'll help you out until you can find something else. I mean, that's just being smart. I mean, when you look at the left, okay, so if one of their apparatchiks on the street gets arrested, they have a bail fund ready to go.
Yep.
What libertarian activists, or even activists on the right, on the dissident right, have bail fund ready to go if somebody gets arrested. If they go to a protest, some Antifa guy starts attacking them, and you whip out your 9 and you freaking put a bullet in them.
Right.
I mean, in this world, you're getting arrested for that because I mean, Soros has done a good job of stacking the DAs all over the place. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, who has a bail fund ready to go for that? Because that Antifa guy, if he got arrested, he'd be bailed out. Mm-hmm. Somebody would be bailing him out. I mean, you say that. What's really funny is notice how they're now going trying to do away with the end of bail. You want to know why? Because they know they know that the era of easy money is over. Yeah.
I mean, and I mean this sincerely when I say 2024 we've had the easy time of the first couple of years of this, of the return of money that costs money, where money should have an opportunity cost like it's supposed to, because now we can bring in Austrian economics and how that affects people and their incentives and their behavior and all the rest of it. My fundamental thesis has been that in order to break these people, you have to bring opportunity costs back. You have to have actions mean something and have consequences. And if you destroy capital, well, then it should be destroyed. You shouldn't be able to go back. You shouldn't be able to go to the Fed discount window and get it at 0% and try again. Right. And this is the problem. And then have the courts back you up, and then have the money, and then have the tax base, bail you out over and over and over again in order for you to do these terrible things. You keep interest rates high, and it kind of sucks for some of us. But guess what? We warned you that get out of debt. I mean, the name of the podcast is Gold, Goats, and Guns for a fucking reason. It's actually for about 17 reasons, right? And it's because that's the process by which you become solid. It's the you become bulletproof so that when things happen, you are prepared, you are capable of weathering the storm and then figuring out what your next move is going to be. They don't have any claim over you. And I've been telling people like forever, like, dude, figure out a way to monetize your hobbies, figure out a way to,
Yeah.
you know, to broaden
That's what I've been telling people. That's what I've been
your
telling
income
people for two
streams and all
years.
the rest of it, because at some
Yeah.
point you may have to.
So I've been telling people for 2 years, and if you are going to play in the system, if you are going to get a mortgage, know what you're getting. Know
Right.
what you're getting into. If you take out $100,000 mortgage and you wait 30 years, you're paying back 300,000 to 400,000.
Right.
Know that. Understand how a usury works.
Right.
Decide whether you're going to get into it and decide whether you can pay it off, and you can pay it off quicker. Things like that. Know how the system works. That's one of the first things you have to do. Second of all, if you do start playing in the system, get the hell out. Jump in and get out.
Mhm.
It's it's
Don't
like,
bet on it.
yeah, yeah.
Just don't bet on it.
Don't rely. If
It's
as soon as you
this is
rely upon it.
why this
So
is
I
one of
pay
these.
my credit cards. I use credit cards every month to get the points and the rewards and everything. I pay them off at the end of every
Yeah,
month. And
you pay them
all
off
my
at the
stuff.
beginning.
Yeah, I don't carry. I don't have any floating. I don't have any unsecured debt. The only debt that both of the cars are paid off. The only debt we have is the mortgage at this point. And we have a plan to get rid of that much. Way in a very short period of time.
Right. And use the tools that are and the liquidity the same way that everybody else does, and then be smart about it. It's interesting, right? I say this, and you know, I have some millennial friends that are part of my board gaming group, and every once in a while they get stuck with the old man before everybody else shows up, and so we sat here, the old man being me,
Yeah.
and we sit and we chat for a while, and I sound eventually kind of, because they know what I do for a living, and they don't necessarily agree with me politically, but they don't care.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we start talking about um, you know, like I had a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and he was telling me, like, he's like, you would be shocked at how much money how averse I am to taking on any debt, how doing this, how much money I have just sitting around in a savings account doing nothing. I'm like, yeah, I actually would. Could you do me a favor, and at least you're in a positive interest rate environment? Could you at least get 4% on this money, at the very least, so that because grow the pile, you know, it, it won't hurt you, have it in such a way you can always get it. You can always get it back to you quickly if you need it, but
Right.
don't be sitting on $30,000-$40,000 at making nothing. Like, they'll give you 4% in this environment. Like, just do that at the very least, right?
If I mean, if you have that kind of
I've had this conversation multiple times.
if you have that kind of money, take half of it and buy land at this point.
Well,
Just buy.
yeah, well, the particular person doesn't want that responsibility, doesn't feel they
Right.
can
Yeah.
handle it at this point or whatever, and that's fine. That's their particular gig, right? And just simply put, just, hey, that's brilliant, and I'm glad to hear that a one moment where you went to Taco Bell and your fucking card was declined and you couldn't eat and you were embarrassed and that was enough to get you to never ever want to be in that situation ever again for the rest of your life. I'm like, dude, that you're doing a hell of a lot better than I did.
Yeah.
And that's impressive. And it was great. I love telling this story, and it's not the only story like that I've heard from people who I would have expected to be in much worse straits than so it is changing, and these are not people who are fundamentally libertarian or right wing or anything along those lines. This is not even about politics. These people are post politics. Forget being post fucking libertarian. That's like such fart sniffing bullshit. These people are post politics.
Yeah.
And
Most of the people around here are too.
yeah,
Most of the people, like the farmers and the people that own chicken houses and everything. I mean, they follow politics, but it's like they're they definitely know there's nothing to be relied on there.
right.
There's nothing to, they're, I mean, one of them, I have to tell him stuff happened in the news or else he won't know, because
Right,
it's just,
right.
he's working, he's
Yeah, they're
staying busy,
working, and
and screw it, who
What's
cares? I
what's
mean,
what's fascinating about this moment in time is that things are so bad. I've said this before. I'm like, it would be, I would love nothing else than to have to go out and go back and get a real fucking job. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like what we do in some ways, no, certainly what I do, um, is it's shameful that there's such a market for it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, but at the same time, the market is there, and then if you can be great at it, and then you can help people minimize the amount of time they have to interface with this bullshit, so that they can go and live their lives and build capital and build wealth and have families and build communities and do all of that while they interact with you a couple hours a week to get the updates as to what's happening. Mazel tov, everybody wins,
Hmm.
and and that's the way I'll be honest with you. That is exactly the way I see this role,
Yeah.
and and
I had a guy.
I
I have a
understood that, once I understood what that was, I'm like, oh, this is not just is this a burden, but it's a responsibility that I take I take very seriously. And I know you do too. That
yeah.
it's incredibly important because this is how we're going to get out of this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm taking the bullets for a lot of people. That's the way I look at it. But I have a guy. I'm dropping an episode with a guy tonight. His whole business that he made was people who are going to school, uh, people who are in college right now, who don't want to deal with all the humanities courses.
Right.
He writes. He has a service where he writes all their papers. He does everything for them. If it's virtual, he has people sit in on the virtual classes for him.
Yep.
So all that bullshit humanities stuff, you pay him, he takes care of it. Whatever you need to make so you can do your job in the future, you take those classes.
FYI, I've never said this in public before, but after my career as a chemist ended and I started like writing, I went up onto Elance, right? And I was writing like SEO articles for $5 a piece in order to end up making, fucking $500, $800 a month. It was awful, right? One of the gigs that I wound up with was doing exactly that. I would write papers for people and I would take classes for people.
Yeah,
I had a guy, I wound up with a guy, I wound up being one of the guys that this guy was doing that service 12 years ago, and
yeah.
I was one of his contractors, and that actually paid far better than everything else. And that's actually where I discovered my love for James Buchanan as my favorite president, because he's the guy who didn't respond to the Panic of 1857,
No, no.
right? And allowed allowed secession to happen because it was the right thing to do and it was the moral thing to do. Even though in a very revisionist way now, I look at it and I'm like, yeah, unfortunately that was all, you know, same people that are trying to destroy the United States now were trying to destroy the United States in the run up to the quote unquote recent unpleasantness. Sorry, we both are now in the South, so we get to call it that. Um, and but understand that these are history is very complicated and it doesn't reduce to any one particular perspective, but that is one of them. And it is what it is. And I still maintain that Buchanan is my favorite president because he's the only one that didn't respond to an international liquidity crisis, banking crisis, by bailing out the banks. He bailed out. He made sure that the economy was fine, and then he let the banks deal with themselves, deal with their own problems, and eventually they did. And then what did they do? They made sure that he wasn't going to be president in 1860. So,
Well, my message: prepare for the worst,
mhm.
and as long as you know that what's coming, the having the dream that what you want to see in the world is going to happen. If what you want to see in the world is going, if the way you're going to get what you want to see in the world right now is you have to start living like that. I've traveled around the United States, been through the Midwest. I've been through towns that were as libertarian as as you're going to get. And no one in that town even knows what a libertarian is. They just live a very libertarian life. It's unspoken that you don't speed past this person's farm. They leave their doors open at night. They leave their doors unlocked at night. It is just, you've been brainwashed to think that you can't do you can't have success, you can't be a success in life unless you're doing it in the big city and you're in a really fancy zip code. No, make your income mobile. You can live anywhere. The guy I was just talking about, who I'm going to have on tonight, who does that thing for college students, he's lived in 7 countries in the last 10 years. He's living in the south of Brazil right now. He's living his life. You know,
Right.
he's just going around. He was born in Russia, came here. He's lived in Spain for a while. We talked a bunch about that off air because I've taken a real big study in the last 2 millennia of Spain. Is like really everything you see happening there. You saw everything that happened there was a precursor to what would happen like in every other country. Even the Spanish Civil War was a precursor to what World
Mm.
War II was going to be, and everything. And yeah, and you just make your income mobile, work from anywhere. And believe me, I mean, I grew up in New York City. I grew up in the Bronx. I grew up in the middle of the hustle and bustle. I took a train to work, a New York City train to school every day. I live, can't you can't see your hand in front of your face at night where I live if you're
Right.
walking in my yard, you know,
Right.
and it's peaceful. You it is Owen Benjamin has taken to saying this recently. He's saying, "My life, I'm living the life right now that anarcho-capitalists wish they could live.
Hmm.
I have no debt. I don't have to go to the grocery store if I don't want to. I have all the animals I need. I have all of this and and I get my income from streaming. I don't have to leave the house. You can have that life right now. You can ignore the state until it comes to that April 15th. But
Hmm.
for 364 days a year, there are places you can go in this country where you can live and not even realize the government exists.
Yep.
And that should be
Yep.
your goal, at least for now.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I
No,
know a lot.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. I was gonna say no. That's exactly right. And you know, the intentional communities and all the rest of it. It's happening, and I've seen it within. I've
The
seen it within.
villages, the villages in Florida is a perfect. It's like if you wanted to figure out how to like build your own intentional community, go study what the villages did.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah, I've been to the villages. It's like you go in the grocery stores and it's really nice. And you talk to the police there and they're like, "Hey, how are you doing? Okay, are you lost or anything?" Because it's basically, it's technically government policing, but it's doesn't feel like it.
Right.
It's like here. It's like government, the police in a small town are not like, all the stories you hear about really bad police, you're usually getting from cities and things like that in suburbs. Where I live, the police are just, they're, they're in the back. They're, just, you whatever.
It is true, and um, yeah, for the most part, yeah, especially out in the counties with the county sheriffs.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
you
And
get
hey,
the farther you
libertarians,
get, away from actual city, actual cities that are politically motivated and everything else. Like I'm telling you, you know, the less these things are an issue.
yeah. And
And
hey, just a message to libertarians. You want to make a change, you want to make a real change in your world, run for sheriff,
mhm,
run for mayor,
yeah,
become the local sheriff. In a lot of locations, you don't have to have previous law enforcement experience to run for sheriff.
right.
Run for mayor of your town.
Hmm.
You you want to make a difference?
You now run a constitutional office.
Yeah,
You
a
run a constitutional office
constitutional
that can
office.
literally tell the feds to go fuck themselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Real power resides with the sheriffs,
I've been
folks.
saying this for 2.5 years. You
Mhm.
want a sheriff that if if OSHA is showing up because they're going to mass vax the town, you want a sheriff who's going to deputize a whole bunch of people, arm them, meet them, meet them at the at the county line, and say, step over this line. Your resting place is going to be in that ditch right there.
That's right. Those found here after
Okay.
dark will be found here in the morning.
Sheriffs are
Yes,
sheriffs are sheriffs have so much power. The John Birch Society knew that a long time ago, and
they did.
they preached about it. Sheriffs have a lot of power, and if you have a good sheriff and you have a sheriff who actually believes in the Constitution and believes in his power, that will do more to quell tyranny, to quell federal tyranny than anything else.
Yeah, they're the ultimate T cells in the political immune system. All right, Pete.
Yeah, yeah.
That sounds like a wrap right there, man. My friend.
Yeah, man.
So, with that said, why don't you tell people where they can find your work and your show and all the happy jazz, and then we'll move on and we'll do this again in a few months.
Well, the Pete Quinones show is on every podcatcher, but you can go to peteq.org and you'll see my podcast there. I have a Substack that is very popular, petesubstack.com. And I'm also, myself and a bunch of guys got together to celebrate Anna, and basically a bunch of people have podcasts and Substacks. We got together. It's called the Old Glory Club. We have a Substack that's great, three articles a week, and we stream on Thursday nights. And we just had Ron Unz on our stream last week, and it was we had a lot of fun talking about what's going on down in Texas, and we talk about the news of the week, and we try to find a couple funny things too to make fun of, so that it's not all serious. But yeah, Old Glory Club and peteq.org. From there, you should be able to find everything.
Excellent, thank you, sir. So as we'll talk soon. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Bye bye. Well, that'll about wrap it up for episode 168 of the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. I really want to thank Pete Quinones for coming on and kind of helping me to describe the plight of what it's like to be post-libertarian in a political sense. I think it's a very important subject, and I want the libertarians in the audience to take our criticisms here constructively. We're looking for practical solutions to the world's problems today. So if we can do that, we can all shake hands again and sing Kumbaya and do the thing. We can actually make this a better world, and we can get through this whole period of insanity, of rampant authoritarianism, with our heads mostly intact and our skins mostly intact. As always, you can follow me on my blog at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728, where I guarantee the very worst version of me will show up every day, because by God, it's in the job description. And of course, you can continue to support all the work at Patreon/Gold, Goats, and Guns, where we do both twice weekly market reports, where you can get even more of me if you want it, and private blogs, and or the Gold, Goats, and Guns monthly investment newsletter, where you can see what it's like to build a portfolio to make sense of this world going, well, rapidly mad. So you guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.